The palace walls, draped in tapestries of past glories, felt like a gilded cage to Princess Anwen. While others revelled in the grandeur of the court, she often found herself drawn to the shadows, seeking solace in the forgotten corners of the library or in the wind's whispers through the high towers. It was there, amidst the crumbling tomes and sunlit motes of dust, that she first learned of the river of golden blossoms. The stories were ancient, their words worn thin by generations of retelling. Each spring, the river bloomed with golden flowers that floated like stars upon its surface. It was said the blossoms marked the way to a treasure hidden since time immemorial, a gift from the heavens, meant for those with the courage to seek it. But the stories also spoke of the spirit, a jealous, sorrowful presence that guarded the river's secrets with wrath and cunning. That spring, an elder storyteller came to court, her arrival heralded by a storm that swept the plains. She was a woman of indeterminate age, her hair silver and her eyes sharp as broken glass. The court gathered to hear her tales, and though her voice was raspy as wind through barren branches, it held the room captive. She spoke of the river, her words laden with a weight that turned whispers into truths. The golden blooms, she began, are not mere flowers. They are fragments of light, pieces of a brilliance too radiant for this world. When the treasure fell from the heavens, the earth wrapped it in shadow, scattering the light as blooms upon the river. The map to its resting place lies in their pattern. But beware, none who sought it for greed have returned unscathed. Her voice dropped, her gaze piercing as a blade. The spirit who guards the river was once a queen, whose jealousy bound her to its waters. She waits for a soul unclouded by avarice, for only they may pass her trials. The treasure is not what it seems. It reveals not wealth, but truth. And truth is the most dangerous prize of all. A silence followed her words, heavy as a tomb. The courtiers, their faces pale and drawn, averted their eyes. To seek such a prize was folly, they thought, a reckless gamble against forces beyond mortal grasp. But for Anwen, the words settled like seeds in fertile soil. That night, she stood on the palace's highest balcony, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the mountains blurred into the sky. The wind whispered through her hair, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else. A faint, floral sweetness she could not place. The river called to her. In the days that followed, she prepared in secret. The court, too entangled in its own intrigues, paid little mind to the princess who slipped quietly from the feast hall or walked alone in the gardens. Only her old nursemaid dared question her. "You've been restless, child," the woman said one evening, her voice a blend of worry and affection. "What is it that stirs your heart so fiercely?" Anwen hesitated, her hands resting on the polished hilt of her sword. "A story," she said at last. her voice soft but irresolute. Of a river that blooms with gold and reveals truths hidden even from the stars. The nursemaid's face paled. You mustn't, Anwen. The river's secrets are cursed, the stories. She trailed off, her voice trembling. They are more than stories, Anwen replied, her gaze steady. And if the treasure is cursed, then so be it. I must know the truth. The old woman could only nod, her eyes filled with a sorrow Anwen did not yet understand. On the morning of her departure, the palace lay shrouded in mist. Anwen, clad in a cloak of deep blue, rode her pale horse through the gates as dawn's first light touched the spires. She carried little, a sword, provisions, and a heart full of questions. As she crossed the threshold of the palace and into the wilds beyond, she felt the weight of her decision settle upon her. The wind grew colder, the trees more ancient, their roots gnarled and their branches heavy with whispers. The river was out there, waiting. Its blossoms would bloom soon, their golden light a beacon for the bold and the desperate. But Anwen was neither. She was something else entirely, a seeker, drawn not by wealth or fame, but by the promise of understanding. And so she rode on, the echoes of the storyteller's words lingering in the air like the fading scent of forgotten flowers. The forest loomed before her, like an ancient sentinel, its edges blurred by the morning mist. No maps guided travelers through this labyrinth of towering oaks and whispering pines. The Shrouded Forest, as it was known, was a place where paths wound in circles and time unraveled into fragments. Anwen hesitated at its threshold, the breath of her pale horse visible in the chill air. Beyond lay the unknown. The first steps into the forest were met with silence, thick and pressing, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath her horse's hooves. The trees seemed to lean closer as she passed, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that let through only faint ribbons of light. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, fleeting and insubstantial, yet enough to keep her hand near her sword. As the hours passed, the silence deepened, taking on an almost sentient quality. It was as though the forest itself was watching, waiting. Anwen kept her eyes on the path, but even that seemed to shift beneath her gaze. By mid-afternoon, she reached a clearing where the air felt heavier, laced with a scent both sweet and sharp. The grass here was darker, almost black, and at its center stood a stag. Its antlers were impossibly intricate, resembling branches laden with frost, and its eyes glimmered like polished obsidian. It stared at her without fear, its presence commanding yet otherworldly. Anwen halted her horse, sensing that this creature was no ordinary beast. "You seek the river," the stag said, its voice deep and resonant, as though the forest itself had spoken. Anwen swallowed her surprise. "I do." The stag tilted its head, studying her. Many have come before you, seeking what lies beyond the golden blossoms. Most have turned back when faced with what they could not understand. I will not turn back, she replied, her voice firm. The stag's gaze seemed to pierce through her, sifting her thoughts and weighing her resolve. The river is not for the faint of heart, child of the crown. It reveals truths that cannot be undone. If you step further, you will leave behind more than your kingdom. Anwen hesitated for a moment, but then dismounted, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. She met the stag's gaze unflinching. I came to find answers, not to cling to what is safe. The stag regarded her in silence before bowing its great head. A golden petal fluttered from its antlers, drifting lazily to the ground. As it touched the earth, a faint glow spread, forming a trail that wove through the trees. Without another word, the stag turned and vanished into the shadows. The glowing trail lit her way, but the forest seemed to grow darker with every step. The trees whispered now, their voices faint but insistent, like a half-forgotten melody. Anwen couldn't discern their words, only the sensation that they were speaking to her and of her. The first night in the forest was restless. Anwen camped beneath an ancient oak, her fire crackling weakly against the damp air. Sleep came in fits, her dreams tangled with visions of golden rivers and shadowed faces. She awoke often, the feeling of unseen eyes heavy on her. As the journey stretched into days, the forest grew stranger. The trail led her past streams that seemed to flow backwards, flowers that pulsed faintly as though alive, and rocks that hummed with a deep, inaudible vibration. Time itself felt unsteady. Morning bled into twilight without warning, and she often found herself unsure how far she had travelled. On the third day, she came across a circle of stones, each engraved with runes she couldn't decipher. The air here was thick, the silence oppressive. She felt the weight of the forest's attention, as though it was holding its breath. "What do you want from me?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. The stones gave no answer, but the wind stirred, carrying with it a faint whisper. Courage. She pressed on, the trail narrowing as the trees grew closer together. Her horse began to falter, its steps hesitant, its ears pinned back in fear. Anwen dismounted, leading it by the reins as the forest seemed to close in around her. When night fell again, the trail brought her to a riverbank. The water was dark, almost black, and the glow of the golden petal faded into nothingness. Anwen knelt, her reflection shimmering in the rippling surface. For a moment, she thought she saw another face staring back, sharp and wild, with eyes that glowed faintly. She blinked, and it was gone. The river's edge marked the boundary of the forest, yet it offered no comfort. Beyond it lay the veil of golden blossoms and the mysteries they guarded. Anwen knew that the trials were only beginning. As she settled by the river that night, the sound of its flowing water mingled with the whispers of the forest. Together, they formed a haunting symphony that lulled her into uneasy dreams. The first light of dawn unveiled a river unlike any Anwen had imagined. It stretched out before her, thus a luminous path of flowing gold, as though the sun itself had melted and spilled into the land. Golden blossoms floated serenely on its surface, their glow faint but steady, like the embers of a dying fire. The air was thick with a fragrance too complex to name, a blend of sweetness, decay, and something ancient. Anwen's horse refused to approach the water, its hooves stamping nervously at the bank. She patted its flank, whispering soothing words before tying its reins to a low branch. This was a path she would have to walk alone. She stepped closer to the river, and as her boots touched the soft, mossy ground at its edge, the air grew colder. The golden light dimmed, and the water began to ripple, though no wind stirred. Anwen felt it then, a presence, vast and unfathomable, pressing against her thoughts like the weight of deep water. A voice emerged from the silence, low and resonant, carrying the timbre of sorrow and wrath entwined. Why do you disturb my sanctuary? The river itself seemed to pulse with the words, its golden surface flickering like a candle in a storm. Slowly, the water began to rise and shift, forming a figure that was both solid and fluid, human yet inhuman. It was a woman of flowing gold and shadow, her eyes glowing like molten suns. The blossoms swirled around her, forming a crown that hovered above her head. Anwen straightened, her heart pounding, but her resolve unbroken. I have come seeking the truth of the golden blossoms, the treasure they reveal. The figure tilted her head, the motion almost serpentine. Treasure? You know nothing of what you seek, child. The river has no wealth to offer, no power to bestow. What lies beyond is a burden few can bear. Then let me decide if I can bear it, Anwen replied, her voice steady. The spirit's laughter was cold and sharp, echoing across the river like shattering glass. Bold words for one so young. Do you not fear me, little princess? Do you not fear the trials that will lay bare your soul? I fear ignorance more than I fear truth, Anwen said. The spirit's form flickered, her edges dissolving and reforming like waves breaking against the shore. Very well, she said, her tone laced with a strange mixture of disdain and curiosity. But to reach what you seek, you must pass through the veil. It will test you, not with brute force, but with reflection. It will show you what lies hidden in the shadows of your heart. As the spirit spoke, the river began to churn. The golden blossoms rose from the water, spinning in intricate patterns, their light intensifying until they formed an archway of pure radiance. Beyond it, the river seemed to dissolve into mist. its end obscured by a blinding haze. Anwen hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The air beneath the arch was heavy and electric, crackling with unseen energy. As she passed through, the light consumed her, and the world shifted. She found herself standing not by the river, but in the great hall of her father's palace. The walls were draped in shadow, the throne empty, its golden surface tarnished and cracked. Figures emerged from the darkness. Her father, her mother, her advisors, all staring at her with expressions that were unreadable, their faces hollow and pale. "You are unworthy," her father's voice boomed, though his lips did not move. The accusation struck like a physical blow, but Anwen held her ground. "Why do you say this?" she demanded. "You abandoned us," her mother's voice whispered, soft but cutting. "For what? A dream? A story?" The figures began to dissolve into smoke, their shapes shifting into reflections of herself. Her fears, her doubts, her failures, magnified and distorted. She saw herself as a child, timid and unsure, as a princess, burdened by expectation, as a wanderer, lost and alone. "Is this who you are?" The spirit's voice echoed, disembodied and all-encompassing. Anwen clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "These are fragments," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "They are parts of me, but they do not define me." The vision shuddered, the images fracturing and dissolving into golden light. She stood once more by the river, the archway behind her and the spirit before her, watching with an expression that was almost impressed. "You speak with conviction," the spirit said, her form shimmering. "But conviction is not enough. There is more yet to face." The river surged around them, its light growing brighter, its song deeper. The path ahead stretched into a golden haze, the blossoms swirling as though beckoning her forward. Anwen took a deep breath and stepped into the mist, the spirit's voice lingering in her ears. "Truth is not found. It is revealed. And what it reveals, you cannot escape." The mist clung to Anwen like a second skin, cold and thick, muffling every sound but the steady rhythm of her breathing. The golden blossoms swirled around her, their light fading into shadows that danced along the edges of her vision. Somewhere beyond the veil, the river's song deepened, its melody fractured and mournful. Anwen pressed forward, her steps hesitant but determined. The world around her was a shifting haze, where time felt unmoored and the air hummed with an unearthly energy. She felt watched, though she saw no eyes upon her. Then the mist began to part, and the land solidified beneath her feet. She stood in a vast expanse of black water, shallow yet infinite, reflecting a starless sky. At its center rose a jagged stone altar covered in roots and glowing faintly with an eerie golden light. There the spirit awaited her, no longer a figure of flowing water, but a form solid and imposing. Her features were sharp and angular, her hair a cascade of blossoms that dripped into the black water and dissolved. She carried a presence that was both regal and restless, a queen forged from centuries of regret. "You stand at the edge of truth," the spirit said, her voice like the crash of distant waves. "To claim it, you must face yourself, not as you wish to be, but as you are." Anwen swallowed hard but did not falter. "I am ready." The spirit raised a hand, and the water beneath Anwen rippled, distorting her reflection. Slowly, 3 figures began to rise from its surface, each one coalescing into a mirror of herself. They were identical in form, but different in bearing. The first was draped in silken finery, a crown of jewels atop her head, and an expression of cold command on her face. "I am your ambition," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "You seek this journey not for understanding but for power, to be more than a mere princess. Admit it, and I will guide you to the treasure." The second was cloaked in shadows, her features drawn and weary, her eyes hollow. "I am your fear," she whispered, her tone soft but biting. "You are running from your kingdom, from its weight and its chains. The river is nothing more than an escape. Accept this, and I will set you free." The third was a child, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching a flower that wilted in her hands. "I am your doubt," she said, her voice trembling. "You think you are strong, but you are fragile. The river will break you. Turn back before it is too late." Anwen stood amidst these reflections, their voices echoing in her mind like the overlapping chords of a dissonant melody. For a moment, their words clawed at her resolve, threatening to unmake her. But then she closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "You are all parts of me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within her. "But you are not the whole. My ambition drives me, but it does not rule me. My fear warns me, but it does not bind me. My doubt humbles me, but it does not define me." The reflections faltered, their forms flickering like dying flames. The child wept softly before dissolving into the water. The figure of ambition turned away, her crown crumbling to dust. The shadowed one lingered for a heartbeat longer, her gaze meeting Anwen's with something akin to respect, before she too faded. The spirit stepped forward, her expression inscrutable. "Few can face their fractured selves and remain whole," she said. "You speak with clarity, but clarity is not without cost. Are you prepared for what lies ahead?" "I am," Anwen said, though her voice carried the weight of exhaustion. The spirit extended her hand, and the golden blossoms bloomed from the black water, forming a path to the altar. Anwen followed, her steps slow but resolute. As she reached the altar, the spirit placed her hand upon it, and the roots that encased it began to writhe and part, revealing a basin filled with liquid light. Its surface shimmered, shifting between gold and silver, reflecting the stars that were not above. "This is the river's truth," the spirit said. "Drink and see what has been hidden from you. But know this, once you see, you cannot unsee. The treasure will not allow you to return unchanged." Anwen stared into the basin, her reflection rippling in its depths. Her hands trembled as she reached for the light, but her heart was steady. "I have come too far to turn back," she whispered. And as she dipped her hands into the liquid, the light surged, consuming her and the world around her. For a moment, there was nothing but brilliance, blinding and infinite. Then, slowly the truth began to unfold. The light enveloped her, weightless and vast, folding her into its embrace. Anwen floated in the brilliance, her senses unmoored, her thoughts stretching thin. Time unraveled, each heartbeat echoing like a distant drum. For a moment, she was not a princess, not a seeker, but something more elemental, an ember carried on the wind. Then the light shifted. It became a tapestry of images, each thread woven from memory and desire, fear and hope. The first image emerged, sharp and crystalline. Her father's throne room, gleaming with gold but cast in shadow. She saw herself standing before the throne, her crown too heavy for her head, her shoulders bent beneath its weight. "This is your inheritance," a voice whispered. Not the spirit's, but her own, distant and layered. "To rule, to bear, to endure. Will you claim it?" The image dissolved, replaced by another. She was walking through her kingdom's streets, the faces of her people blurring as they turned away from her, their whispers cut sharper than swords. "She left us," they murmured, their voices tinged with sorrow and anger. "She chose the river over us." Anwen reached out, her hand trembling, but the figures faded like smoke. The final image was the river itself, its golden blossoms drifting on the surface. A girl sat by its edge, her face obscured by shadow, holding a single blossom in her hands. Anwen recognized her instantly. It was the part of her that had lingered in the palace's quiet corners, dreaming of something more. "What do you seek?" the girl asked, her voice achingly familiar. Anwen hesitated, her own answer tangled in her heart. I seek the truth. About myself, about the river, about what lies beyond." The girl's hands opened, releasing the blossom into the water. It floated away, its glow growing fainter. "Then you must accept what the truth demands." The images shattered like glass, the fragments dissolving into the light. Anwen fell through it, tumbling until the world resolved itself once more. She was back at the river's edge, the spirit standing before her, her form softer now, less imposing. "What did you see?" the spirit asked, her voice quieter but no less commanding. Anwen's knees wavered, and she sank to the ground, her palms pressing into the mossy bank. "I saw my fears, my burdens, the weight of my choices. I saw myself. The spirit nodded, her expression unreadable. The treasure of the river is not gold or jewels. It is clarity. The blossoms are pieces of light, fragments of a truth too vast to hold. It has chosen to reveal itself to you, but the burden of that truth is yours alone. Anwen looked into the river, the golden blossoms reflected in her eyes. She saw her reflection again, but this time it was whole. The fear, the ambition, the doubt, they were all still there, woven into her, but they no longer controlled her. They were threads in a larger tapestry. What am I meant to do with this truth? She asked, her voice a whisper. The spirit stepped closer, her form shimmering, like water in sunlight. That is not for me to answer. Truth does not demand action, but understanding. What you do with it is a story you will write for yourself. The spirit's form began to dissolve, her edges fading into the river's glow. Go, child of the crown, she said, her voice like the wind. Your journey is not yet over. The river will guide you, but it is your heart that must decide where to lead it. As the spirit vanished, the river calmed, its golden light softening to a quiet shimmer. Anwen stood, her reflection steady beneath her feet. She turned back toward the forest, where her pale horse waited. The path ahead was uncertain, but her heart was lighter, her steps surer. The truth she had sought was no longer a burden, but a guide, a flame to light the way through the darkness. As she mounted her horse, the river's blossoms began to bloom again, their golden light stretching across the horizon. Anwen looked back only once, the spirit's final words echoing in her mind. Truth is not found, it is revealed, and what it reveals, you cannot escape. The princess rode on, her silhouette fading into the forest's embrace, the golden blossoms a distant glow behind her. The river of golden blossoms had given her its gift, and with it a chance to shape her own destiny.